Welcome to Book Sandwiched In. My name is Dorothy Miner, and I have the privilege of being the president of the Friends of the Library, and I'm a member of this Book Sandwiched In committee. Book Sandwiched In is sponsored by the Friends of the Tulsa City-County Libraries. We have complimentary coffee and water and snacks over to my right. We hope you're all members of the Friends. If you need to join or renew your membership, you will find membership forms over on my right as well. We invite you to bring your lunch or purchase lunch at the new Elam Cafe on the first floor. Our next book talk will be November 6th, and the book is True Biz by Sarah Novick. Today, I'm happy to introduce my friend Mona Easterling, who will tell us about The Change by Kirsten Miller. And you get a bonus book today, When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. Mona Easterling began her post-secondary education at TCC, completing a biotechnology associate in 2010. Following graduation, she transferred to NSU's Broken Arrow campus to complete a natural sciences master's with molecular emphasis. Her thesis involved transgenic plants and was entitled, okay, I have to read this carefully, Plant Selectable Marker Gene Deletion Using VXV1 Site-Specific Recombination System. She can tell you about that later. Okay. Her career passion lies in the interface of science and communication. I think that's evident. She has also recently joined the Friends Board, so we're glad to have her on that as well. She found it a pleasure to begin working at TCC under the supervisory care of Dr. Diana Spencer as the OKINBRE Bioscience Outreach Representative in 2014. This grant-funded position allowed her to develop institutional knowledge and student support skills vital to her internal transition to AEP Credits Count Program Manager in 2016. With great joy, Mona joined the TCC biology faculty in 2018 to follow in the footsteps of individuals who began investing in her more than a decade ago. Please welcome my friend Mona.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dorothy. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to be here with everyone today. I didn't mean to go forward yet. I was just going to mention that I remember many of you being at our spring event, and that was so nice being at Heirloom Rustic Ales. Thank you for coming out. This is my first time to do 2 books sandwiched in 1 year. So I was with you in the spring. So glad for that opportunity and glad to see some familiar faces here today. My first time to do 2 books, and I think this will go really well. Just a sampling of 2 books that thematically cover women's issues. So the first thing I want to talk about, you guys know I have to bring some biology to the table. I want to talk about oxytocin. And just for those of you who haven't been thinking about this, peptides are proteins, and that means that in our cells, we carry the DNA instructions for that molecule. DNA, because of the way it is located in the nucleus of our cells, can be turned off, it could be turned on, it can be turned up or turned down, and there are differences in expression of oxytocin. So it's prevalent across species, very prevalent in mammal species to drive social behavior. We see differences between males and females for both production and reception of oxytocin. So a neurologist told me that in general, human females have about 8 times the oxytocin levels as a human male. And of course, because it's based on DNA, there's going to be variety there. And this is a favorite topic of mine. So I've done some specific research on it. You know, if you look at primate populations, and if anyone has seen Chimp Empire on Netflix, it's a very short documentary series that would remind you of Nature on PBS. And it follows one group of chimps through a season of their lives. And it's really interesting because you can see the chimps are really divided into 2 groups. And it's not necessarily male and female, but there's a group of chimps that stay by the stuff. okay, near the nest. And there's another group that periodically patrol the borders. Okay, and as you can imagine, this is the more aggressive reproductive age males. Okay, and there's not a doubt that oxytocin drives the behavior between those two groups. Okay, in addition to that, I have happened to look into the prairie vole expression of oxytocin quite a bit. And I'm also a big sister. And this fun fact absolutely fascinated me in the prairie vole. If female prairie voles that are virgin are exposed to child rearing, it increases both the production of oxytocin in their brain and the receptors they produce on the neurons in their brain. Okay? And that's with them for life. We know that human maternity would not be possible without oxytocin. There's a lot of reasons for that, and it's a major player in both the contractions associated with labor and also lactation and letdown. So oxytocin is going to play a role in both of the books we talk about today, and it's one of my favorite molecules. If you're interested in oxytocin, I would encourage you to look into it a little bit more. The first book we're going to talk about today is The Change. And all the quotes that you see in my presentation are directly from the text I read, and any mistakes are my own. But I felt like if we looked at a few quotes, it might give us an idea of the characters that are in this book. So I'm not going to read all of the quotes out loud, but Harriet is a main character in this book. And I felt like this quote from Harriet really spoke volumes about her role throughout the entire book. And the thing I do want to mention about this, I was talking to a few of my friends this week, and I have this in common with Harriet as a person. My neighbors probably don't like this about me very well, but as a biologist, I keep a few areas of my yard wild. And it's inside rock borders, but I don't do anything to control the natural flora and fauna of that area. And I found over the years, it makes a very nice habitat for rabbits. And I have a lot of ground cover there that helps them feel safe. And as a result, I have a lot of hawks that like to nest near my property, you know, so it's a functioning little ecosystem right in my backyard. In the book, Harriet definitely has her own strong feelings about the urban landscape and that the property that she has of her own. My favorite character in the book was Joe. And I love this quote from Joe. And I can say this, I feel like pretty fairly as a postmenopausal woman. I love this sentence at the bottom. She could feel the energy coursing through her body, traveling up and down through the crown of her head and cascading around her in a shower of silvery sparks. And I will say that, you know, I practice yoga, I work out, I have had this physical experience, and only at this time in my life. This was not something that happened to me when I was much younger. And I attribute that personally to changes in oxytocin in my body. I think, you know, Joe's character has really tried to live her life intentionally and purposefully, and it brings some results to her, you know, not maybe any answers, but definitely some results. And like I said, she was definitely my favorite character. I think as we see women aging in culture around us and the way that's changed in our lifetime, you'll see some more about that in the next book we cover. There is a movement that encourages women to step into their own personal goals and their own fitness. And this sentence in the middle, her body, which had long held her back, had finally freed her. You know, that's a really positive and powerful message in this book. If you're looking for something in that vein for yourself, or maybe even a friend or family member, good messages out there coming to us from Jo. And then this gives you an idea of some of the quirky, funny tone that's found throughout the book. Nessa is a minor character in the book, but I loved her take on this when Harriet brought up her feelings that sex was just a natural bodily function. Nessa was very plain, I'm too old for that bodily function. And she brings a lot of humor and several surprises throughout the book, The Change. And Harriet brings some of her own personal experience as a professional, a female executive, and she's sharing her truth with some of the women in the community. And this sounds like something that I would tell my daughter, you know, and I do believe the 4 truths, and I think it does not pay to take anything personally. You know, I don't think it pays to take anything personally, but Harriet says in the book, everything is personal. And if somebody tells you it isn't, they're trying to pull one over on you. You know, there was something about Harriet's tone in that quote that really made it stand out to me. And of course, relationship comes into this book. And as we see several characters struggle with relationship, I thought this statement was very true and it resonated with me. A woman much like her had once loved a man who looked like him, but neither of those people existed anymore. And as the years go by in our life, we can sometimes look back, and it's great when relationships last a long time, because the truth is the person you are in your 20s is not necessarily the person you are when you're in your 50s. And it's great if you can have a long-term relationship that withstands things like that. And in this case, this quote is referring to a person who did not have that person in their life anymore. But it is often true as we move through the phases of our life that the people we were then are no longer the people we are at a later chapter in our life. And this also reminds me of the experience Jo had and things we've talked about in other books sandwiched in. She hadn't expected to survive the experience, but she had, and now she was completely invulnerable. Sometimes when we face those daunting challenges that we never thought we could, it really leaves us with a sense of invulnerability, or even, I think sometimes a sense that, you know, you've done the greatest work that you've been called to do. And as a result of that, you feel a sense that I have had a life well lived. Whatever happens now is okay, because I rose to the challenge and I feel like I've had a life well lived. And there is some, of course, romance and relationship. Harriet tries to describe to somebody how she feels about attraction. And she said, do you know how beautiful it is to be alive? And that reminded me of a study I heard of years ago that said the most attractive quality in surveys. So if they survey anonymously men and women and ask them to rate attractive qualities about someone they are attracted to, the very top result in the survey was confidence. And I think that confidence of embracing aliveness is something that really can't be matched. And then at the end of this book, they kind of circle back through the themes. And this was one that I actually did speak to my daughter about, the first one, because this was important to me when I was raising her. I wanted to teach her how to take care of herself. I did not want to train her to be pretty and kind and polite and naive. So as soon as she was able to cognitively absorb that, I wanted her to know that the world was full of wolves, because I I did not want to be surprised if she went out into the world and got eaten. So I asked her, I said, I want to make sure that my perception of this is the same as yours. And she was like, oh yeah, Mom, your perception is the same as mine. And then I loved this last quote, and I felt like this really spoke. The author and I agree, if this is what you're looking for at the end of your life in terms of a partnership, though they'd both retired, a lifetime of discipline had left them both early risers. Every morning, as soon as there was enough sunlight to see, they'd set off on a stroll. So that gives you a little taste of the tone and the change. And when I was reading reviews of the change, one of the things I heard it compared to was HBO's take on Big Little Lies, which is a series that's available now. And I could see that. I thought, yeah, the tone of this and the things that really resonated with me in this work reminded me of Big Little Lies. And then we'll transition to our other book, When Women Were Dragons. Now, the change was set in modern times, and this book is a little bit different because it is set in the 1950s. And oxytocin is a big player in this work as well. It spans time, but there's a portion of this book that is fantasy. And one of the things that is the fantasy is this phenomenon they call dragoning. Okay. And the thing that I liked about dragoning is that throughout the piece, they refer to dragoning in a way that is scientific. And this quote from the prologue lets you know. I think I literally stopped on this and laughed out loud. I was like, oh, I'm going to love this book when I read this. Peer reviewed when possible, so that all of the people could better understand dragoning. And this is just a personal belief of mine. I'm a big believer in the collective unconscious and how all art just keeps moving the collective unconscious in the human species forward. And I think science is a great example of that. I love it when we can take information from long ago, just because people have written down their thoughts, we can still go back and look at what they wrote down years later, and it can help us today. Auntie Marla was one of my favorite characters in the book. And if you were at Book Sandwiched In March, when I talked about lessons in chemistry, I talked about women holding the world on their shoulders. And I pulled this quote because I thought it was extremely well said. And the author points out that Auntie Marla was the pillar that held up the roof of my family's life. I thought that was just said much more eloquently than the way I did. Beatrice is the main character of this book. Oh, I apologize. This is a quote from her, and she is talking about a sister that was a young woman who was raised as her sister. And this happened in my family as well. And so I wanted to stop here and just bring up a couple of points associated with this. Usually when I'm here, I talk about the implications of trauma and biology, and this is a little bit on the psychology spectrum for me. But in the book, there is complete suppression of the facts regarding the biological relationship in these two young girls. Okay, and I don't want it to be a big spoiler, but they really were not biological sisters, but they were raised as sisters. And I have a brother who is not my biological full brother, but even until he was a teenager, he had no idea. And so that was very hard for him when he found out that he was not, we didn't have the same biological parents. And it's the way this passage is worded is very similar to the way we were raised. And to me, I added at the bottom, this can be strongly associated with both denial and hyperarousal, and it's also clearly linked to generational coping. So I want to explain what I mean by that a little bit. And I hope some people have seen World on Fire on PBS. Okay, I like the nods. World on Fire reminds me of this denial and hyperarousal. I think they are doing a brilliant job of displaying that. When we think of what's now called the greatest generation, you know, when I was growing up, my grandparents were in that generation and they helped raise me. But denial was a big part of coping. And to me, I wish I could remember the character's name. If anyone here can remember her name and remind me, I hope you will. But, you know, she has a way of suppressing what she doesn't. She's the mother of Harry or Henry. I hope I don't mess up his name. And I didn't even think I would talk about that today, but it is the example I thought of for denial. She has a way of coping with him. She's very brisk. She's very efficient. She's going to deny the things that interfere with her getting through her day. And she's going to stay very busy and on task and on point and make sure that things in the family go the way they're supposed to go. And this is very typical in neurology for the way that people deal with overwhelming levels of disruptive change. You know, and during World War II, when Europe was being bombed, that definitely qualified for those levels of disruptive change. And, you know, in my family, we were impacted by World War II in that same way. And I could see this kind of coping in the people that raised me. And it's not bad, but it's like sometimes denying that you have feelings or emotions is one way of coping, and staying busy is one way of keeping that denial functional. So I felt this explanation in the text was really brilliant. And it seems like, I feel like if I was trying to explain this to my grandson who's 5, you know, there was no discussion and no explanation. If anyone asked a question, I was interrupted, ignored, or punished. I could see that. And if that wasn't the environment I was raised in regarding my biological relationship with my brother, then it wouldn't have stayed a secret until he was a teenager. You know, so this kind of secret keeping, it does persist, but I felt like the author did a magnificent job of conveying that clearly and succinctly. This is a quote that I would say in one form or another, I try to convey to my students every term. Scientists do not try to prove anything. That's usually the first thing that I feel is a misconception I encounter when I'm teaching biology. We aren't trying to prove anything. We have ideas, and we're going to try to conduct some experiments to either support or fail to support our idea. Either way is fine. We can publish it either way, but we're not trying to prove anything. And the most important quality I feel like in any good science is curiosity. This is a great list, but because science itself is so humbling, I don't feel like very many people are going to stay in it if they're not also curious. So the curiosity can be the fuel. And, you know, if you're trying to prove something, it can make you disobedient to the data, disobedient to facts. So it's not always that helpful for people to try to prove things. And this kind of speaks to the phenomenon of dragoning. And I love this. Dragons like chore charts and sharing and book clubs. And, you know, I love all those things too. Now I think I went the wrong direction. So a dear friend of mine recently had her first dream about flying. And I hope it's not too much for me to say that she's in the same age demographic that I am. And so I love this description, and it actually made me think of her takeaway from her dream. Sensations of optimism, cheerfulness, and a strange, fierce joy. Fierce is one of my favorite words, so I was absolutely delighted that the author worked it into this sentence. I just love that. And resilience. this quote from the book, when I read this in the book, one of the things I will say about When Women Were Dragons, I laughed out loud. I definitely stopped myself while I was reading with my own laughter. I could outthink and outlast anyone who coasted in on their granddaddy's wealth. I thought that was just hilarious and brilliant. And then this is thematic and, in my opinion, also related to oxytocin. And another thing I didn't throw out in the beginning about oxytocin, not only does it develop in females that ability to stay with the stuff that we see in primates, those who stay with the stuff also have a fierce ability to defend. So anyone who's with the stuff, there's always going to be some people in the middle, that aren't fierce enough to be out there fighting yet. And that's another property of oxytocin as well. We were fine for now. I couldn't think how we would manage in the future, which remained impossible to imagine or plan for. All we could do was leap. And I think, in this novel, she's exploring some fantasy ideas relating with social upheaval, but this quote relates to things that we could face, not in the realm of fantasy when it comes to social upheaval. And in addition to that, things that most of us just face in the course of a life well lived. And then at the end of this book, I felt like when she was concluding this, she did a masterful job of wrapping her theme up at the end. And both of these quotes speak to that. I held the threads of the universe in my mind and attempted to pull them together. And for me, and she does a really good job of this in the novel as well, this to me spoke of not just what scientists do, but also what librarians do. And I feel like that is the pull of what librarians are and do in the community. Because the truth is, for many children who walk in the doors of a library, they are there, just like what happens with one of the characters in the novel, trying to understand the world around them and needing some help. Sometimes, we would love it if all the children in our community could figure out the world around them with the people who love them at home, but that's not always possible. And I feel like librarians are one of the people in our community that really try to hold the threads of the universe and help pull them together for people. And then at the end, I chose this work, this path, this life, this precious life. And maybe it is because I am enjoying this time of my life, but I thought that quote at the end of the novel really spoke to the purposeful nature of our main character's work. And I have all the sources for my oxytocin, all my links if anyone would like them. I'm happy to share them. I do see that there are some questions on the chat. I want to make sure that I ask for questions in person first. So are there any questions from our in-person audience? Yes.
If you were going to tell somebody about the connection between these two books, what would you say?
If I was going to talk about the connection, and this is me rephrasing the question for those of you out there virtually, what would I say the connection would be between the change and When Women Were Dragons? Because of the setting of When Women Were Dragons being in the 50s, I feel like it is a lot more about how do women find their power inside when social constraints keep them from having power on the outside. But both of these books are about women finding their power. And for me, that had a lot to do with oxytocin. Anyone else here in person before I move to chat? Okay, let's take a question from Sam. Oh, okay, I can see 4 questions in the chat, and I will go ahead and move this. And maybe they are from before I started. Oh, absolutely. I'm going to put this back in presentation. I just saw myself. Yes. So, and I will try not to be a spoiler. Dragoning is a phenomenon in the book where adult females at the beginning of the book, when the prologue is written, can spontaneously change into a dragon morphology. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a fascinating book, and I will say that even my science brain was willing to suspend belief, and that the themes of the book are so well connected to the biological phenomena that it was believable for me. Yeah, I would recommend this one. Yeah, good. Yes, absolutely.
For someone who hasn't read either one of them, if you were considering it, which one would you recommend reading first?
Okay, so for someone who hasn't read either one of these books, my recommendation would be to read When Women Were Dragons, if you are in the mood for something that is substantial and related to social constructs. So a little bit meatier. And then if you are in the mood for something that is fun and like a girls' night at the movies, read The Change. You know, so for me, I'm probably more in the mood for something meatier in general. You know, if I'm going to take time to sit down and read, so that's why I picked it first. You are welcome. Yes.
It had a lot of political aspects to it, but the scientific part.
Absolutely. Yes, and you bring up an interesting point. I don't know that I've ever read another book like that. So if anyone in this group of readers can think of one, please let me know. I don't know, and I read fantasy from time to time, science fiction. And I don't think I've ever read a book, because I wouldn't put this book on the fantasy shelf. I mean, it just seems like fiction to me. But she takes this fantastical scenario, and her entire approach is like you see in this prologue. It is like, I'm going to take a scientific method approach to this idea that I've just made up. And so it is written, and there is a character that throughout the book that is a scientist, and he is researching the phenomenon of dragony. And it's about what he faces as he researches that as well. So there's a personal story that happens to a family, and there's a social story about how this is playing out in society. And for those of you online, if you couldn't hear our audience member, she made a great point about how that brings in government repression at some point and challenges to what are then existing social norms. So really thematic in a meaty way about how we treat each other and how that ends up mattering in a society.
Also addresses prejudice and education.
Yes, prejudice and education play a role in this. How do we access education? How do we allow it? And then when we don't, how does that go underground and still continue? Because we know from history, that's what happened. Great questions. Great questions. Yeah.
The author's background, is she a scientist when she's not writing?
This is, not that I know of, and she is Kelly Barnhill. Does anyone here happen to know? Yes.
Well, I looked her up.
Yes.
And which one? Not, but anyway,
Yes, she has published children's books, and this book was an award winner. She's received a lot of accolades for this. I felt like this could be a really good film. Did anyone else feel like that? Yeah. Yeah, I have high hopes for this. There are aspects of this book that would remind you of Harry Potter a little bit, you know? Yes, and wonderfully. I tried not to spoil any of that, but yeah, she has some great explanations. But the reason I think it works is because it's solidly based on family characters that are not just believable, but likable, you know?
very unlike.
Yes, and some very unlikable ones. Yeah, I'm already in denial about all of that. I've repressed every bit of it. Yes. Yes, and I'll ask on let me repeat what she said for the group. She's noticing that in general, there could almost be a genre about female empowerment books because there are so many of them right now. In my personal reading, I haven't come across them, but in my book club reading and things like that, yes, they're suggested more and almost maybe more mainstream. And I think there's a little bit of difference between female empowerment and female revenge. And I'm more on the empowerment side. There's probably more revenge elements in both of these than I brought out, you know? And I wonder how much of it is generational because the women who are writing these books are not my age. They are younger than I am, you know? So that's interesting too. And I saw a hand in the back. Did you want to add? Oh, okay. Okay, exactly. And I don't know that if anyone in the audience has another one that leaps out at them, I hope they'll share it. But in my mind, these women would have been closer to being raised by someone who was born in the 1950s. So both of these authors may have been raised by someone who was born in it. Yeah. And so I wonder if that's why we're seeing this kind of work. Because women who were going through this weren't, you know, it wasn't the right time or the right, but their daughters may be writing about that, which also makes me think of Lessons in Chemistry. And I believe she's in the exact same age range where, you know, now the daughters of women who fought for the right to work and earn a living wage, those daughters are now being able to tell hero stories about their moms. Thank you, oxytocin. These are great points. And I think that's the beauty of talking about books. I think, you know, there just aren't very many things out there that can offer us an opportunity to discuss themes like this. in ways that are empowering to everybody in the room. And books bring us that. Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here in person and on Zoom. Thank you for a wonderful book sandwich stand.